So if you're watching videos of vintage guitars on YouTube, then you're probably familiar with the story of the Epiphone brand and its involvement with Gibson, which is not the same story that it is today. Today it's Gibson's budget brand. It allows them to access more customers at a lower price point. That is not what it started out being. It was a family house brand completely separate from Gibson from the late 19th century up until October of 1957. And in the mid-50s, sales were stalling, and they had made a deal to sell to Gibson. October 1957, that sale closes. From 1958 or 1959 all the way up to 1969, the Epiphone brand was actually a slightly upgrade to the Gibson brand guitars. And a lot of times Gibson would have the kind of Gibson version of a model and then the Epiphone equivalent, which would be slightly different. Obviously the aesthetics are a little bit different with the branding and the headstock shape, but there's something tone-wise about the Epiphone Texan, which is otherwise structurally identical to the Gibson J45, that makes it sound slightly different. It's subtle, but it is different, and I'm going to measure it and show you in a bit. This one is from 1968. I was so thrilled when we got pictures of this guitar. It's a factory cherry red Epiphone FT-79 Texan C. You can see that on the pickguard. It even has FT-79 Texan C. That C standing for cherry red, which is a cool, kind of semi-custom color with white pickguard that is just such a cool look. And you've probably seen Walter here on my channel, True Vintage Guitar. He's a new employee here. He started a couple months ago. And when he started, I asked him a question. I said, you've probably been looking at vintage guitars, and what kind of guitars do you want to stock here in the shop that make you really excited about vintage guitars and that you really want to play that you haven't had access to yet? And he said that he had recently been to the Gibson garage and he played a Gibson J45 60s style cherry red with the white pickguard. And that morning I had gotten the lead from Robin, who owned this 1968 Texan in cherry red with white pickguard. I said, hey man, you're in luck, because this is not a J45, it's slightly different, but to me, a little bit cooler, and I love what makes this a little bit more special than a Gibson J45. So this is Robin's family guitar, and when it came in, I was so thrilled because it was completely original, it was clean, it had the hang tag, the case, great package, but it did have a couple of maintenance items that it needed. Number one, typical for 1960s Gibson acoustics, the bridge was lifting a bit. And that's because the glue joints eventually fail on these guitars, this one being from 1968. And so a simple repair which didn't cause any damage underneath the top. The other thing is that the tuners were just a little bit stubborn. They weren't nice to tune. We kind of worked with them a little bit and to see if we could free them up and make them a little smoother, but they didn't really. So we currently have these reproduction tuners installed, which are just the same style, no extra holes, and just, super easy to tune. We've got the originals in the case here. But kind of the main thing is that the neck set wasn't perfect. So when we're talking about a neck set, we're talking about the angle of the neck in relation to the body. And wood is dynamic. It moves over time with different, with temperature, with humidity, with string tension, all that sort of stuff. And so neck sets are kind of common on acoustic guitars, not as common on 60s Gibson guitars. But what is common is that a lot of them develop a hump at the neck joint to the body. Just however way they're constructed, a lot of times this fretboard will be straight and then take a little jog right there at the joint. So I thought to myself, okay, if the neck set isn't perfect and we have a little bit of a hump, just like every single one of these does, let's go ahead and set the neck. Let's get the neck angle perfect so we have a perfect saddle height, perfect action at the 12th, and when we do that neck set, we can also resolve the hump at the end, at the neck joint to the body. So I took it to Jason Burns, my shop. I've been working with Jason for over a decade. This is his shirt here, and he just does a spectacular job on that stuff. Very indetectable. I mean, if you look closely, you can kind of see since it's lacquered over neck joint, but a very clean job, and he just totally nailed the neck angle. Completely resolved any kind of hump at the neck joint, so that when we got it back, it was exactly what I was hoping it to be, which is a vintage collectible guitar with all the vibe and tone of a vintage Gibson, but none of the drawbacks that you might see on a vintage guitar. You might see a great deal on a vintage acoustic, and it needs a lot of money and time and repair work. Not only that, it also needs a careful hand that kind of knows what the problems are and the proper way to resolve it. So that's what this guitar is. It is perfect. Perfect playability like you'd get out of a Taylor, but all the tone and vibe of a vintage Gibson guitar. So it kind of satisfies both of those things for me. Which brings me to the main difference between the Epiphone Texan and the Gibson J45. Gibson buys the Epiphone brand in October of 1957, and from 57 until, really they start production in 58, until 1969, they had their kind of Epiphone line, which was manufactured in the Kalamazoo factory right alongside all of the Gibson stuff, and usually the same quality or a little bit better, a little bit, maybe a subtle tweak in the model. So the difference in the J45 and the Texan is more than just the branding, the headstock shape. The primary thing is that the Texan is a long scale guitar. It's 25.4 inches. You can see the proper way to measure scale length on a guitar is to measure from the front of the nut to the very top of the 12th fret, and then double that. But you can also measure to the bridge as long as the bridge is installed in the right place, and this one is. So 25.4 on the Epiphone Texan, and on the Gibson J45, it's about 24.75 inches long. So slightly shorter scale for the Gibson J45. It's a subtle difference in tone, but when you have a longer scale, your string tension is a little bit different, and it just seems to drive the top a little bit more than a J45. Now the downside is that when you're making kind of complex chords, you probably, with the same string gauge and the same tuning, you probably have a little bit more string tension here. So it might be, you might have to have a little bit stronger left hand to fret those chords the way you want. It's a subtle difference, but tone-wise, I think the Texans end up being a little bit louder, a little bit rumblier, and maybe a little more tension on the strings to get the same note. So that's kind of the significant difference in the Texan and the J45. But I'm excited to show you guys this one. I'm excited for Riggs to come in and play it so you can actually hear how it sounds. So that's the 1968 Epiphone FT-79 Texan C. Cherry red, white pickguard, a beautiful example that is 100% ready to play. It's going to be a rock solid vintage guitar for you for a long, long time. Don't leave it in the trunk of your car on a hot day. Short of that, this is not going to need any maintenance for a really long time. My name is John. My shop's called True Vintage Guitar. I'm here in Birmingham, Alabama. If you want to check out the vintage guitars we have for sale, check out truevintageguitar.com. If this is still available, then there's going to be a link down below in the description. You can click it, see all the specs and weight and pictures, and we'd love for you to take a look. And if you like watching videos on vintage guitars, which if you're here, if you're still watching right now, then clearly you do, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We'd love to have you subscribe because we're doing these videos about 2 a week or so. And you know, we find mostly what I like to call uncirculated guitars. So guitars that come from the families of their original owners or have been owned by that one family for many decades. They don't usually come out of collections. So there's always a story to them. There's always a bit of processing to get them back into great playing condition that we're proud to be able to do and then get to present them to you. So thanks for watching.